Have you ever been to timeout? Like, maybe that one time you might have hit your brother or your sister and that hurt them? Or maybe that one time that you might have eaten your dessert when you weren't supposed to because you hadn't finished your vegetables? Or maybe that one specific time when you stole all of your little brother's Pokemon cards because you didn't have any of the Pokemon cards that he had and you wanted them, and then you put them under your bed to hide them from him, and then he found out that they were there, and then he told your mum and dad, and then you got in trouble. Timeout's really boring. And that's kind of the point. See, timeout is actually a time for us to stop what we're doing and have a think about what we've done. It's also a safety boundary for us. We know we've done the wrong thing, and there's consequences for our actions. And so we need to make sure that we're making good choices, because we can really hurt other people or even ourselves with our choices that we make. Now, last week, Sarah actually told us about someone who was really good at making bad choices. His name was Zacchaeus, and he was a really short little guy, and he was a tax collector, and so he cheated all of his friends, and he took all this money, and he was just really nasty to people. But then Jesus comes along, and Zacchaeus is like, oh, I want to see him, but I'm too short, so he climbs a really big tree, and then Jesus is like, hey, Zacchaeus, you're pretty cool. I'm going to come over to your house, and we're going to party. And Zacchaeus is like, what? I'm not all that cool. I'm kind of a bad dude. And Jesus is like, well, I don't care. I know you, and I think you're great. Jesus liked Zacchaeus in spite of the bad choices that he'd made. That is a big deal. How good is it to be known by God? For someone to know who you really are, to know everything that's going on in your head, every thought, every fear, every win, every loss, all of the decisions that you make. That's amazing that someone would know that and love you, even though they know all the things about you, even the things that maybe we're not super proud of. It's so good. Well, today I want to tell you a story that comes from the Bible. It's from Luke chapter 8, verse 26, if you want to read it later on. So the story starts with Jesus and his crew, his disciples, and they're on a boat and they're sailing to this place that they want to go and visit. So they land on a shore and they have to walk past this cemetery that's just on the outskirts of town. And they meet a guy who's just hanging out there. Now, the Bible doesn't actually give this man a name, but I think we're going to call him Bob for this story. Now, we don't know how Bob got to this cemetery, but the Bible tells us three key things about Bob. One, the cemetery was his home. What? That's not where living people live. That's weird. Number two, he was all alone. Like, literally no one was living with him. That's sad. Number three, he was really, really scared. Like, I'd be scared if I lived in a cemetery, but like, he was just scared in general. And that's pretty sad. That's a sad way to be. Now, like I said, we don't know how he ended up living in the cemetery, but it's a pretty safe guess that he didn't choose to live there because he wanted to live there. My guess is that maybe Bob had made some bad choices and maybe he'd hurt some people or maybe even himself along the way, and he couldn't live in the town anymore because it wasn't safe. The what and the why of how Bob ended up living in the cemetery doesn't actually matter. We just know that he was in timeout. So back to the story. Jesus meets with Bob, and Jesus can see that Bob is in no great shape. He's not doing too well, and that's really sad. But do you know that Jesus didn't look at Bob the way that the townsfolk did? He didn't see him as this reject who wasn't good enough to hang around or someone who made bad choices and therefore they weren't worth anything. He just saw Bob. Jesus saw past his faults. He knew that he'd made some bad choices. He knew that life hadn't been very good for him, but that didn't matter to him. Jesus wanted to meet him, and he wanted to make sure that he knew that he was accepted. Now, the townsfolk, they heard that there was some kerfuffle going on at the cemetery, so they decided to mosey on down and find out what was going on. And hang on a second, whoa, wait. There's Bob, and he's calm, and he's sitting at the feet of this guy Jesus, and he's making good choices, and he's a nice guy. Whoa, what's going on? But the miracle doesn't stop there, actually, because what happens next is Bob gets to go home with the townsfolk who had previously rejected him, and he gets to be part of the community once again. How amazing is that? Once Bob knew that he was accepted by Jesus, his life was completely turned around and transformed, and that meant that other people were able to accept and love Bob for who he was. So some of you might be sitting there and be thinking, you know what, this Bob character sounds a little bit like me. I'm a little bit on the outside, and I'm maybe not accepted by many people. I don't have many friends, and I'm a little bit lonely. Guess what? Jesus accepts you. Or maybe you're sitting there thinking, you know what? I already know that Jesus accepts me. I know that he knows me and loves me no matter what. Well, then your job is to be like Jesus to the Bobs of this world, to the people who don't have anyone to accept them. You should probably be showing them Jesus' love as well. So if you only remember one thing from today, I want it to be this. You are accepted. God accepts you.